Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, episode 368. Who has a problem with diversity in school? And we're going to talk about the scam of war. So I'm a little bit early today because I have to go to another jazz concert, two of them actually tonight. So I'm foregoing my exercise and just doing my podcast episode instead. So I went on Twitter, and the first thing that I saw was a tweet by Corey DeAngelis, the school choice evangelist, and he was having a live stream discussion about a Supreme Court case out of Maryland. And just basically, it's parents who are, uh, I guess, suing or brought a case complaining about pride books, which are mandatory reading in their schools. And we're not talking about high school, we're talking about kindergarten, elementary school levels where there are, it's mandatory reading. So there was a opt-out option for families and for kids. So opt out for religious reasons. But the Maryland schools ended that option. And so now everyone has to be exposed to those books about LGBTQ or some sort of pride type topics. Now, as I understand what they mentioned, I unfortunately wasn't able to listen to the entire podcast. I did listen to about 20 minutes of it, and they brought up the fact that this option to opt out arose out of, if I understood it correctly, out of the tension between Catholics and Protestants in Pennsylvania in the 1800s. So you saw a lot of Catholics coming into the United States and they were going to school, but they were upset because the curriculum was Protestant in nature and the Catholic families wanted their children to be raised Catholic. And as a result, one of the fallouts of that discussion was the creation of the Catholic school systems and university, right? Parochial schools. And so that way, Catholics were able to go to schools that were more in line with their teaching and their beliefs, not only at the younger levels, but also at the university level. So we see the reason why there are so many Catholic high schools, elementary schools, and universities, right? So it comes out of this desire to have education in a different kind of way, in a way that fits more in line with their own religious beliefs. And keep in mind that a lot of the Catholic schools, they are not monolithic. They are not all exactly the same. So you look at high schools, and by high school, you will see that there is a difference, and it depends on the sect or the order of priests that have the most amount of say and influence over that school. So, as they were discussing the case today, you see that it's a problem with public school education. And the reason is because kids are forced to go. In other words, the law of the state says that all the kids have to go to school. It's mandatory. However, they are not given a choice, right? So it's not like you have to go to school, pick the school of your choice. It's you have to go to school and you're going to this school. And the curriculum at that school is also dictated by other people. And this is what has been determined as a good curriculum that your kid must learn. So it's one size fits all. Uh, you know, if you don't like it, too bad. You have to learn it, right? So there are no alternatives. And this is the monopoly system in full view. I've talked about it before, how the public school system, the biggest problem of the public school system is that it is a monopoly. You have no choice. And even if you try to have a say or an influence in the curriculum, you have to take them to court, which is a long, drawn out process. Victory is not guaranteed. The teachers union, the public school system, they have deep pockets, and so they can draw this out. And it puts a burden on the parents who want to have their child educated in the way that they believe is good. So clearly, the solution is the freedom of choice, right? It's always going to be the freedom of choice. This is the easiest solution that anyone can reach, right? So the only reason why we're having this discussion is because of the protected monopoly status of public schools. There is no freedom to choose. There is no uh, effective means of complaint to have influence to change curriculum. Everything is top down. But if we could break this monopoly and restore the freedom of choice, the power of choice to the families, then you can take the funding that goes to these public schools and have it follow students to the school of their choice. So in Florida, where DeSantis basically kicked out DEI out of all of the schools, you see LGBTQ pods, right? Which is sort of flipping the script. Generally, you see public schools that emphasize or have a large LGBTQ representation in the public school curriculum. You see a lot of Christians or people who don't like that ideology opt out of the schools and start their own little education pods, study pods. And in Florida, because you see everything on the opposite extreme, DEI being kicked out, then you see LGBTQ families and students forming their pods. And that's basically what we want. We want the freedom for people to be able to educate their children in the way that they see fit. Now, I'm not sure if in Florida the money follows the students, but I know that one of the people on the podcast, on the live stream that Corey DeAngelis was having was a lawyer, and she's familiar with a state where there is complete school choice and the money follows the students, right? And so when the money follows the students, it's not automatically given to the public schools, then all of the schools, including the public schools, must are pressured to deliver a product, an education that will attract more customers. And so if you're satisfied with having a very small student body that will cater to LGBTQ students, so be it, right? That's basically what it is. In other words, when you allow for choice this way, people begin to see the true cost of their choices, right? So not only the size of the school, the number of friends that they'll have, but also can you find a league for the students in your school to compete in sports, to debate, to have chess matches, whatever, right? Is it possible or not? Can you get a job? Can you uh, gain entrance into a university with your credentials that you acquired from that school? And keeping in mind that universities also would be liberated from government regulations um, to be required to teach certain things, then depending on the university, they could either, accept LGBTQ students and say, well, but we don't, our curriculum doesn't really cater one way or the other. We're just going to teach this way. Or you can have universities or colleges that do cater to LGBTQ students, right? Then they would attract certain kinds of students, right? And so you'll be able to see this wide variety of choice everywhere you go at every level. So people see the cost of their choices, they see how popular their ideas actually are, and then you can go from there. Apparently, in Maryland, as I said before, families were able to opt out. until recently. And I believe they said in the live stream that in that county, I believe it was Cumberland County, 700 students. Out of all of the students, I don't know how many there were, but I would imagine it would be many, many 10,000s more than 700. 700 students opted out. But I guess for the LGBTQ crowd, that was too many, right? And that's what is characteristic of that side of the debate. They cannot tolerate even the smallest number of dissenting voices. That is a trait that can be attributed to that racialization, intolerance of dissenting voices, intolerance of diversity. If there is diversity, it must be according to their definition of what diversity would be. Back in episode 187, I talked about the Democratic Republican political affiliation among university professors, and that the ratio was 70 to 1, 70 to 1, Democrats versus Republicans. And I would joke around in class. I would say, the number I gave them was more like 12 to 1, 15 to 1, but 70 to 1 is more a humanities ratio, right? So when you take into consideration chemistry, math, and those kinds of majors, then that average comes down a little bit, right? But it's still north of 1 to 1, right? So in the humanities, it's 70 to 1. And so I would joke around in class that as an anarcho-capitalist, I don't even register, right? My demographic is so small that it doesn't register, and everyone would laugh, right? Because they realize just how skewed this understanding of diversity actually is, right? So it's a pretend diversity. It is a regulated diversity. It is not an organic diversity. And I've talked about how the Trump coalition, the coalition that got Trump elected, was very diverse, but it was an organic one. It wasn't a forced one. And so you can have diversity. It's just that, unfortunately, people cannot tolerate the percentages that come out as a result of an organically developed diversity. And so, in a world where Democrats to Republicans is a 70 to 1 ratio, anarcho-capitalists don't even factor in, no one could stand me, right? I would show up to meetings and everyone would sort of roll their eyes every time I would open my mouth. And so I just stopped opening my mouth altogether because I knew that everyone would just simply ignore everything that I say. And even if they did try to agree with some of the things that I would say, they would do it only in part, which would defeat the whole point that I was trying to make. So I would talk about how to get out of a box, the mental box, right? And I would describe the box. And none of them ever considered describing the box, right? And so they would say, oh, this is interesting. So tell me what the box looks like. And I would tell them, and they would say, well, I don't like that one. And so they would reject things because it was incompatible with what they decided was non-negotiable, right? In other words, they telegraphed to everyone around them that they are going to be in a box, but they have decided that their box, their small little mental box, was out of the box, right? And I always thought that was funny. I would tell students that story and they would get a kick out of it as well. And so the people who are like that, who are intolerant of different ideas, of diverse ideas, right? They don't like that mechanism, which tells people whether an idea is good or bad. Right? And hence the monopoly setup. If you have the monopoly system where the messaging is always the same, then everyone must learn whatever it is that you're telling them. There's no dissent that is allowed. There are no other ideas. And I guess theoretically, they believe that if you force everyone to believe and learn the same things, they will become the same. But it's the script of every dystopian novel and movie that ever was written. people are not like that. People cannot be programmed to agree with everybody else. Some people love it, right? And so I guess like 20 to 40% of the population absolutely love that, right? And half of that number is on the left and half of that number is on the right. But they each love their certain small set of um, ideologies that are within their box. Break the monopoly, and now you have room for people to pick and choose what exactly they want to subscribe to, which is completely intolerant, right? You cannot have that. It is not permit. It cannot be permitted by people who live in their own little box. And so all of these schools are fully funded regardless of the quality and performance, right? Regardless of whether they are actually educating people to be ready for the world, society, independence. And students and families are subject to the whims of the district, whoever is calling the shots. And so the solution is simply freedom of choice. Now, the second topic I wanted to talk about today was the scam of war. And today in my seventh grade class, we were reading about the Barbary pirates and how they were raiding shipping. They would kidnap people, hold them for ransom, and you had to pay the ransom in order to get your people back. And so people were complaining to Thomas Jefferson, hey, do something about these pirates over on the Barbary coast in Africa. And the text would make this big deal about how weak the US military was, how weak the Navy was, to justify later funding a Navy and an Army and the Marines and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so you begin to see very early in the history of the United States is very, very nascent, the beginning of a military industrial complex, right? So people want a large military for what, right? And so I would say, and so that war against the Barbary pirates went on for 4 years, right? Lots of killing, I am sure. And I asked the class, what would be an alternative, right? If the US said, nope, 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 we're not going to invest in a Navy, we're not going to invest in uh, an Army or Marines, right? What would be the options left for these, ship captains and businesses that are involved in international commerce, transatlantic, transoceanic commerce? Well, the businesses would have to pay for their own protection, right? So these businesses, though, they don't want to set aside all this capital, all this money for security. So what they do is they go to the government and they say, tax the people and make them pay for our security, right? So instead of forcing businesses to do what they need to do to stay in business, all of the cost is put on the consumers, the taxpayers, right? And you can see people making all sorts of justification, like this is part of the cost of bringing products to you. No, no, that's not really true. It's very, very sloppy, right? It's not specific to the task, right? So what would happen instead if you have all these Barbary pirates, right? Businesses would have to pay for specific security that they need, build the ships that they need, or they would negotiate with the pirates themselves, maybe trade with the pirates. Like, what would it take for you to leave us alone, right? I mean, if they were anything like the Somali pirates of today, these people are desperate, right? They need work. I mean, they wouldn't be risking their lives as pirates if they could find honest work, right? And so you start a trade deal with them. You say, well, what do you have to offer? What do you need to be able to start producing something, right? And so you have this kind of arrangement. And the same is true for our own private property. You just hire private security, right? And at some point in time that the local police used to be private security, right? If you watched Gangs of New York, if there was any, give you an idea, different gangs of police would compete for business. And then someone somewhere along the line, they would say, you know what? Let's just have the city pay for the official police, right? And so then we don't have to have all of this fighting, this contract negotiation, trying to figure out who gets the contract for the city. We would dispense all of that, right? But it'd be a lot cheaper, right? If people were responsible for providing their own security, you can see a small community do that. And so that security company, whatever it might be, is very accountable for all of its actions. How many people are they going to harass? How many people did they kill? Right? How many people are they going to throw into prison? All of these different things, you can crunch the numbers and determine whether or not you like that private security force or not. And doing it that way, forcing businesses to be responsible for their own trade routes and protecting their property, you avoid having a standing army for the country. And if you have no standing army, then there are no military adventures. Um, you're not always looking for the next war to fight. And that's something that is very desirable. And so people who look all over the world and see things they don't like, well, yeah, go and fight if you want. Um, why is this an issue? Why is the war being a scam? And the way they have the country, the taxpayers pay for their business interests, does it have any relevance for today? Well, yeah, the war against Iran, right? Sure, yes, Israel is trying to get the United States to do it because Israel hates Iran, but also because there are pipelines that are going through Iran, which would allow Russia to be able to sell a lot of its liquid natural gas. At least that's what I understood. I believe that's what Douglas McGregor or Scott Ritter said, that the war in Iran, right, is basically for two reasons. Israel wants it, and there are liquid natural gas companies in the United States that do not want to compete with lower priced Russian LNG. But you can't tell the American people, oh, we got to bail out the American LNG companies, so we're going to start bombing Iran. No, you can't do that. So you get to get the rest of America on board, you lie, right? You talk about terrorism, how they have a nuclear program, when we already know that the United States probably funds more terrorism. I mean, we talk about Al Qaeda and then we support Al Qaeda in Syria and then we go fight them in Iraq. It's so schizophrenic, right? Like I remember someone was talking about it. It reminded me that at one point, I think it was in Syria, where the rebels who were funded by the CIA was fighting against the rebels that were funded by funded by another branch of the U.S. government, right? And it was just so ridiculous. Why are we funding any of them? It's just kind of interesting, right? So um, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. Iran does not fund terrorism in the way that a lot of people in America believe they do, right? If anything, the United States is the guilty party. So it's a case of bootleggers and Baptists, right? So Israel wants the war, and the neocons in America, they want the war, but no one else wants it. No one else cares. So we need diversity in education for diversity of ideas. Uh, I also today in school, I went over the walls of the box. And if you have all these problems, that's a sign that you are in a box, right? You can't come up with solutions. You're making the same choices over and over again, which is creating the same or intensifying the problems that you have, and you have no solutions. I talked about the box in episode 321, 21, and 22. And I talked about it today. Like, what are the walls of the box? Well, you need to know what those walls of the box are so you can come up with new ideas, right? This is where the diversity of ideas come from. You don't force people to have diversity of ideas. Ideas come from your own personal situation, the problems that you're struggling with. You come up with solutions and then you share them with other people, right? That's where you get the innovation. That's where you get the diversity. You can't get it from a top-down situation like a monopoly type educational system, right? And what's the point? You get out of the box so you have hope. And if you listen to my Sunday sermon, that's what it's all about. Hope, right? Not having to spend your whole life, waste all of your time for a problem that you just can't seem to understand or get moved past. You want hope for a better future, right? That you'll be able to live one day without these problems and have a better quality of life, right? And so we need freedom of choice in school so that we can talk about issues like war is a scam. That way, people growing up in the United States can continue to live in freedom and enjoy a good quality of life. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.